So focus appearance is a new success criterion WCAG 2.2, was proposed at this stage, not published yet. So the idea is to ensure the focus indicator is contrasting and reasonably sized. It builds on focus visible from WCAG 2.0, which didn't really define what visible was. And in working on this, there seem to be three main factors for the visibility of a focus indicator. The first is a change of colour contrast from the original colour. So the top example being shown is 4 dark buttons, and if you can see it, there is a light grey indicator going back and forth between those buttons. It doesn't have a very good change of contrast, and it's not very visible. The second is the size and thickness of the change. So the second example is for light grey buttons with a small 1 pixel thick border just on the left hand side to indicate focus. So it has very little size and is not very visible. And the last example is it showing the difference of contrast from the surrounding colours. So in this case, 4 dark buttons with a 1 pixel dark indicator going around it, which makes a very subtle difference in size. So that lack of adjacent contrast is what makes it more difficult to see. So that's change of contrast, size and thickness, and the adjacent contrast. So going backwards from that, what are some safe indicators? Safe as in would pass the success criteria and you can be reasonably sure would be visible. So the first is a contrasting line slightly separated from the button. When even down a 1 pixel thick, if you take that approach, it's reasonably contrasting. 2 pixels would be better. 2 pixels and a halo sort of effect would be even better. But yeah, that's your sort of baseline of a safe focus indicator. Another approach is a block, either inside or next to the button, that has contrast both with its surroundings and that change of contrast. So in this case, a yellow block inside of a blue button is quite clear. And another safe focus indicator is a very thick indicator. So even if it doesn't have adjacent contrast, if you add 2 or 3 or 4 pixels as an outline around a button, that is generally going to be quite visible. It visibly changes the size of the button. So down at 1 pixel, it's quite ropey. That would fail the guideline. But once you go beyond that, then it is much more effective. So looking at the actual criterion text, I'm going to break it into kind of 3 parts. So the first part, but they all start when the keyboard focus indicator is visible, one or both of the following are true. And then we've kind of got option 1. You can do option 1 or option 2. But option 1 basically says the indicator encloses the component, has a change of contrast of at least 3:1, and has adjacent contrast of at least 3:1. And just as an example, that is our dark indicator going around a dark button but separated. So it's enclosing it, it has a change of contrast from white to dark blue, and it has adjacent contrast of white to dark blue. So that's a good example, and if that's okay for you as a focus indicator, do that, job done. However, if you want a different kind of focus indicator, we have to move into option 2. So option 2 sort of mirrors, but gives more flexibility compared to option 1. So instead of saying it encloses, it says it gives you 2 possible size criteria. So, for size metrics. The first size metric is at least as large as the area of a 1 CSS pixel thick perimeter of the unfocused component or subcomponent. So if we take an example button that's 25 by 100 pixels, and you sort of draw the perimeter around, break that into its constituent parts, add those together, that's 25 plus 25 plus 100 plus 100 equals 150 pixels. Technically, we should take off 4 pixels because the corners overlap, so it's actually 146 pixels. However, if you're worrying about 4 pixels, pick a different focus indicator, go bigger. The second size metric you can use is at least as large as a 4 CSS pixel thick line along the shortest side of the minimum bounding box of the unfocused component. So taking our same button, if you put a kind of 4 pixel border down one side, the size of those is 4 times 25, that's 100 pixels. And this is a really useful metric if you've got buttons that vary in size because of text they contain. So if you get some links or buttons that are shorter than others because the words are shorter than others, this one stays constant based on the shortest side. So it's kind of a more reliable and usually slightly easier to meet metric. It gives us a bit of buffer. Now, it isn't a suitable replacement just for that one CSS pixel perimeter example, because when you have things like squares and circles, the minimum bounding box can actually create a larger sort of metric, a larger size that you would have to meet. So for example, a 1 pixel perimeter of the circle wouldn't pass this size metric, but it does pass the first one. So a circle being, perimeter of that is 2 pi r, so 100 times 3.14, if it's 100 diameter circle, equals 314 pixels. So that's less than the 400 you would need for a 100 by 100 square. Last difference to point out in option 2 is the adjacent contrast aspect, and this is where it allows for a lack of adjacent contrast if it's thick enough. So it says 3.1 against adjacent non-focus indicator colors or no thinner than 2 CSS pixels. So if the area of the focus indicator meeting all of the following is at least 2 pixels thick, then it doesn't have to have adjacent contrast. Still does have to have a change of contrast though. So when testing focus appearance, there are a few examples that we can look at and pretty much just see that they are passing. So if it's a 1 or more pixel solid contrasting outline that has both adjacent and change of contrast, that will pass. It's meeting the option 1 part of the success criteria. If you've got a fairly thick, say 3 pixel dashed or dotted contrasting outline, that will also pass. If you have a change of background color that has sufficient change of contrast, that's also going to pass. And then also we've got a couple of user agent exceptions. So one is if you can't change the focus indicator, that's not author responsibility, therefore that's accepted. And if you don't change the focus indicator or the background colors of the focus indicator, then that will pass. So if you've got a default browser-based focus indicator on the default background, that will pass. There are some which are quite easy to fail. So if you've got a 1 pixel non-contrasting outline, or a 1 pixel dotted outline, or a changing background color that isn't a very big change of contrast, or if you're using the default indicator, say on Firefox or Safari, if you've got a blue background with a blue indicator, that won't pass, and nor will the default Edge or Chrome indicator if you have a dark button and don't do anything else to the indicator. For some reason, when you've got a button, the dark part of the indicator is placed onto the button, which is a shame because Edge and Chrome have done good things with their default indicators, but there are still some edge cases where it's more or less invisible. And there are a couple of useful methods for testing focus appearance. My preferred one is to test with the browser inspector. So right click on, for example, this link, and straight away it gives you the size of that link, which is quite helpful if we have to do any calculations. But to get at the CSS, you need to inspect, go to the Styles tab, select the kind of hover, I'm not sure why it's called hover, but it's basically the element states, and then tick focus, and focus visible will help with some buttons. And then in the computed styles tab, we're looking for things like box shadow, outline, border, or sometimes background. So depending on how the focus indicator appears, it's likely to be one of those. In this WCAG example, we're looking at, that's based on box shadow, but often you just search for outline and you'll find what you need. And then you can also use a graphical method of working out exactly what an indicator is. There's a couple of caveats. You need to make sure that you're using a standard density monitor, as in one device pixel is one OS pixel. You can check that on screenresolutiontest.com. Also, make sure the browser is at 100%, otherwise those values, computed values, are going to be different from what the author has set. And then there's quite an easy way of taking screenshots. I use a Mac, so I tend to use Shift Control Command 4. Shift Command 4 will put it onto your desktop. Shift Control Command 4 will put it into your copy paste history. So it basically copies that screenshot, and then I open up Preview and press Command N for new thing, and it will just open it straight from your paste history. And then within Preview, you can just select an area. So I zoom in massively, so that each pixel is very large, and then select the thickness of that indicator. And in the example from GovUK, we can tell it's got a 4 pixel thick indicator. So that's just a sort of fairly standard way of checking thickness of indicators or how big something is. And there's a couple of tricky examples I wanted to finish up with. So one was a search input on gov.uk is the website, and it has like a yellow sort of halo effect, but also the border of that gets thicker. So I wasn't sure just by looking at it whether that was going to pass or not, because it lacks adjacent contrast. So I'd be looking for at least a 2 pixel increase in the thickness of that. And that's what we found. So I inspected it, found that box shadow, and the inset 2 pixel dark border basically just adds to that. When I confirmed it, I took a screenshot of both the non-focused and focused state. I put that together as kind of a half and half, and I could then see that it was a 3 pixel yellow, 2 pixel dark indicator being added. So that passes. And if you do need to get into the maths, sometimes that will happen when you've got things like a dashed outline. So I was looking at the Microsoft.com homepage, and one of the very first links on the page is their logo. So that uses a 1 pixel dashed outline. I was thinking, it's 55 pixels tall, 137 pixels wide. So if we were looking for the perimeter, well, it's not going to pass. We can tell that because it's a dashed outline and it's 1 pixel wide. Therefore, it's going to be less than the perimeter. When I was testing in Firefox, it was something like 3 pixels on, 3 pixels off, so 50% coverage. So it doesn't pass the perimeter metric, but does it pass the shortest side metric? So 55 pixels tall times 4 is 220 pixels. So is that perimeter at 50% coverage meeting 220 pixels? So working out, the perimeter is 384 pixels, dividing by 2 for that kind of coverage of dashed gives us 192 pixels. Therefore, no, it was just under 30 pixels short. In Firefox, however, when I tested in Edge or Chrome, that was more like 3 pixels on, 2 pixels off. So it actually had greater than 50, probably like 60 or 70% coverage. So it would pass if you were testing in Edge or Chrome. So if you are catering to a wide, general public set of browsers, then that's not going to pass. If you are in maybe an intranet environment where you've only got Edge or Chrome, you can make that case and that would pass in that scenario. However, I would recommend is adding something. So either don't use dashed, keep it solid, and then that's straightforward. Or actually the very next link in the Microsoft navigation is a text link, and all of the text links also have a thick underline underneath the text, as well as the dashed outline, and that would pass. And you don't even have to, do any calculations for that. When you add up that dashed outline and the thick, I think it's 3 or 4 pixel underline, that's always going to pass. So hopefully that's helped in terms of how to understand and how to test focus appearance.